Welcome back to the great MGB rebuild. This is part 11. So last month we completed installing most of the carpets and we installed the vinyls. So the first thing we're going to do this month is we're going to finish off the interior. So the next process is to actually refit the dash. So we've in this photo you can see I've refitted it all. I think I showed rebuilding the dash in the previous video. To fit the heater control cables and to get all those nuts that hold the dash done up properly, just rotated the car on the rotisserie so it's upside down. Makes it very easy to sit underneath the car and finish off those all those connections and installations. So it's really important that when you put the dash back in, put all the nuts and bolts that hold it in place in properly. And one of the most important ones is actually the small brace that sits across above where the speaker goes on the center console. You can see the two bolts on the bottom of the dash in this photo. If you don't get all these in and you don't put those braces in properly, the whole dash will rock around as you corner and things. So with the interior all but finished, it's time to fit a few of the external bits. So the rear bumper fill-in plates, and some nice stainless steel scuff protectors. Put the new aluminium radiator in with the brace that goes across that holds it in place as a test fit to make sure. Good thing I did because half the bolts don't actually line up, so I fixed all that. Then took it all out again because it has to be out in order to fit the engine, of course. Then I made up a nice little cover to cover the fuse block and all the wiring that I'd done previously where the relays are, and that looks pretty good. So the next project is to tackle the grill, which you can see in this early photo is in a pretty sorry state. So step one is to drill out all the pop rivets and pull the various parts apart and then start reforming the aluminium. So this is a 1970 and it's got the recessed or fish mouth grill. It's made up of about 4 different bits, but it's really thin aluminium. So you've got to handle it pretty carefully. You can sort of panel beat most of the dints out, pull the grill section off the front, pull the chrome trims off, and then polish them up on a buffing wheel, and they came up quite well. So I sent the grill and the lower part off to the powder coaters. They've just come back, and now it's time to reassemble all the bits. They're all pop riveted together with small pop rivets. So we used some clip clamps and put them in to hold it all in place, and then found some nice blind pop rivets and put all them in. Then it's time to reinstall the chrome trim that goes around the center of the grill. They're held in by these little tiny plastic clips, and the chrome trim clips over the top of those clips in much the same way as the side trims go on the side of the car. With that done, it's on with the badge and it's looking pretty good. So I think we've done just about everything we need to do while it's on the rotisserie. So I had a good check around and tidied up one or two minor things that I thought were easier to do while I could spin it around. And then it was time to take it down. So I took it off the rotisserie and put it back on my yellow rolling stand that sits underneath the chassis. So with the car back up the right way finally and on my rolling stand, first thing I fitted was the rear bumper and its overriders. And that sort of makes the back end look really finished now. So that looks great. So now it's time to start fitting some of those major mechanical parts. So I decided to do the front end first because of the way it sits on my stand. It's going to be more stable if I balance the front heavier before I put the diff in. So I, using an engine crane, lifted up the whole front sub member because this is really heavy, this thing. Lifted it up and pushed it in on from the side and slid it in on top of the rolling stand brace rails. From there, I reattached my engine crane to the sub chassis and lifting it up through the engine bay there. And using two long half-inch socket extensions, which you can see on either side as locating pins by dropping them down through the bolt holes, I was able to lift the subframe up into position up underneath the chassis rails. Now with the crane now holding it in position, I was able to fit the back two bolts and do them up enough to hold that in place while I took the crane out, pulled the pins out that I used, and then fit the front two mounting bolts, and then torque them all up. So with the main part of the subframe in place, it's time to start fitting all the extra bits. So start off by putting the spring in, and then putting in the lower kingpin bolt to hold that in place. Then the disc brake backing plates, then the discs and the hubs and the bearings. With all that done, I then put on one of the wheels just to see how it looked and give myself a bit of motivation. So with the front end done, it's now time to put the diff in. So I pulled the diff off the bench where I've had it wrapped up in plastic for the last 6 months, and gave it a good check out before I was ready to put it back in. Thought I'd put the fixed brake lines in place before I put it under the car, which is makes it much easier because it's a bit of a bugger. It's got two pieces and a T-piece, and it bends and wraps around the axle. So it's quite a difficult thing to bend up. So it's got all new brake lines, but you've got to bend them and fit them in place where they won't rub and where they're behind the axle generally, so they're not vulnerable to being hit by things. It's a tricky installation, actually. So just before I lifted it off the bench, I did a final check, and I thought I'll put the spinners on the hubs so I don't damage the threads when I lift it off. And good thing I did that, because when I went to screw the left and the right hand ones on, I found I put the hubs on the wrong side, so the left hand thread was on the right hand side. Anyway, good thing I did it. So with it up on the bench, it was an easy matter to swap the hubs around from side to side, put them back on, put the spinners on, and then lift it off with the engine crane and stick it under the back of the car. So the way you put the diff in this is to put the diff in roughly its right place and lift it to about the place where it would be on full extension, and hold it there. So I've done that with 2 saw stools under either side of the axle and a jack under the front to stop it swiveling around. Then what you do is you put the springs in, and you attach the front pivot bolts to the springs, and then you pull the springs up underneath the axle and you put the back shackles on. Once you've got springs on the front and the back, then you can put the U-clamps, your U-bolts over the axle and down onto the springs, and you jack each spring up one at a time and put the plates on the U-bolts and do it all up. It's pretty easy if you get the sequence right, but with new bushes and everything, sometimes getting those U-bolts and getting all the bolts in can be a bit of a struggle. But with some silicone grease to grease up the new bushes and things, it can be done. I think it took me about half a day to get it all done and crank it up right. Once you've got all the springs in and the shackles in, you can connect up the flexible brake line, put in the shock absorbers and the down links, and put in the what do they call them? The axle straps. It's not fitted in this picture here. You can see the bolt that it attached to. I originally had rubber axle straps, which I bought brand new, and I think the very first time I let the axle down and let them take pressure, they both snapped. So gave them away, and I got a couple of custom ones made out of strapping, nylon strapping material, and they are really good. So that's about it for this video. In the next one, we're going to be fitting the handbrake cable. We're going to fit the steering column, steering wheel, make some covers to go up under the dash and cover up all that wiring mess that you see on most MGs. Make it look pretty. A little bit of tidy up with some of the wiring and the pickups for speedos and things like that. Then we're going to fit the seats, and with that, it's almost done, with the exception of the engine and gearbox. The gearbox is done, but we're waiting on the engine to come back from the machinist. So that's something to look forward to. I've been promised it for next week, so I don't think it'll hold us up by the time I do those other things. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.